for those who've joined us, thank you very much. We wanted to give a chance for some of our friends on Substack to join. I'm really happy to be here with Tim Mak. I'm Steven Beschloss with America. Tim publishes the valuable, the insightful, the counter-offensive, which he does, I'm going to say, bravely from Ukraine, and has been doing that for now, is it a few years, right?
Yeah, I first arrived in Ukraine as a correspondent for NPR. And then in 2023, I started my own company called The Counteroffensive.
Right, right. And so, the thing about all of this, I mean, I think we have a lot to talk about. And I particularly, the national security strategy, so-called, kind of came out in this last week. And I really thought about you, just because, not only just sort of your strategic insight, but you're somebody who can, I think, look at it through the prism of on the ground reality that I think, many of us may lack, and from which we can learn. So, look, but before we jump into that, I want to just ask the most important stuff. How are you? How are the conditions on the ground in Kyiv? Are you safe? How much are you traveling outside the city these days?
Well, what we're doing now is the counteroffensive is started to mentor a group of young Ukrainian journalists. And so as I mentor these Ukrainian reporters, and try to teach them human interest reporting and feature writing and that sort of thing, I find myself kind of jokingly thinking, I'm kind of becoming more of a bureaucrat than
Oh,
a
goodness.
journalist.
Oh, there it goes.
um, I
We
still edit
remember you
every.
when.
I still edit everything, and I still, you know, make approve every story idea and work with our reporters. But I kind of think of it as a way to force multiply, and also kind of create a group of and a cohort of reporters that, for a very long time, will be able to, in English, tell their story to the rest of the world, and that's really
That's important.
that's an important thing.
Yeah, and I'm maybe at the end of this conversation, I'll ask about how long do you think you're going to be around there. I don't know if and when or how often you think about it, but there's no question, whenever it is that you're not there, it's awfully important to have people who are on the ground who can continue to do the work.
Yeah, I think I'll be here for the foreseeable future. As long as the war is going on, I'll be here. And when the war is over, I'm not going to leave either. I think it's important not to make the mistake of so many other American uh, foreign policy follies, which is the second the imminent crisis is over, we just forget about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
this was the lesson of Charlie Wilson's war, of course, right? That
yeah,
we helped the Afghans get the Soviets out, and then we said, okay, well, on to the next thing, and that was a huge
right.
mistake. And as an American, I want to do everything that I can to push us in the other direction, and help support a fledgling democracy that, frankly, deserves
Yeah.
our support after all of its fighting for freedom.
Well, so you have suggested that our topic is strategic blunders, um, and I think we have a few of them to talk about. And and that includes sort of talking about this sort of so-called peace proposal, which I want to get to.
Yeah.
Let's talk first about the so-called national security strategy, or perhaps the national insecurity strategy, which, much like the sort of so-called recent peace proposal for Ukraine, parts of this document feel like they could have been written by the Kremlin, right? And it includes things like this. It complains that many European leaders, quote, trample on basic principles of democracy to suppress opposition, which is to say, of course, supporting the far right, white nationalist political parties.
Mhm.
At the same time, this document urges, quote unquote, strategic stability with Russia, and quote, an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, while quote, calling for, and this is related, I think, calling for quote, ending the perception and preventing the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. So this reads to me like a capitulation to the desires of Vladimir Putin. I mean, what do you read? I mean, how do you read this?
Um, I think in order to be a solution to problems, you have to properly diagnose the problem. And one thing that's very clear to me in the national security strategy is that it doesn't understand the threat of Russia at all, and it doesn't even understand why Europe would feel threatened
Mm,
by Russia on its doorstep as a neighbor. The strategy is a very hostile document, and I think because I'm in Europe right now, let me
mm,
focus on Europe because there are plenty of other things to talk about. But
indeed.
one of the things that the national security strategy is, it accuses the the European continent of losing its quote unquote civilizational self confidence. And the way that it describes one of the reasons, one of the pieces of evidence it uses to argue that is that it asks, well, why is Europe so fearful about another war with Russia? Well,
Mm,
the looting, the raping, the killing of your next door neighbors will do that.
yeah,
And the fact is that the Trump White House does not understand uh, the threat of Russia. It simply wants to capitulate to Russian demands, among which is Ukraine ought not to be a part of NATO.
yeah,
And so we're not arguing about that as part of a peace deal. We're simply giving it away without anything in return. Um, and it makes very little sense. I think you're right to point out, in particular, that the national security strategy has a huge problem in that it considers immigrants to be some sort of contaminating force.
mm.
It's very thinly veiled
The
racism.
term that's used in the document also is sort of civilizational erasure.
That's right.
I mean,
They were saying that Europe will be unrecognizable. It won't be European anymore. And it's got this idea that Europeanness is defined by race, not by civics, not by citizenship. Um,
blood and
uh,
soil for this bunch.
Exactly, exactly. When, of course, we all know that Europe is far more complicated than that and has been for centuries and centuries and centuries, if not millennia. I
Mm,
mean, Europe is not a quote unquote white place or a place that is just one ethnic group. It's been a very contested continent for a very long time, and with a lot of contributions from people of all colors and stripes and ethnicities. So
well, and
it's just bizarre. The strategy just shows no understanding
yeah, I
of
mean,
the.
no understanding of history, for sure, and which is no surprise since we can assume that this was largely fueled by driven by Trump, who doesn't read, who's not a student of history in any sense, wouldn't be able to go back over the decades of the centuries to kind of
Well,
evaluate what it means to be Europe.
it struck me that a lot of the language
Mhm.
in the national security strategy what mirrored JD Vance's speech at the Munich Security
Yeah,
Conference
in
earlier
February.
this year. And I've seen some reporting that JD Vance and JD Vance is a very peculiar apparent setup where he's running foreign policy out of the vice president's office, which is
Mm.
not is not a typical situation, but you could see JD Vance's influence throughout this. And I
Yeah,
wonder,
he was
Stephen,
he was belligerent in February at the security conference, and this document sort of emulates or advances this same kind of belligerence towards Europe.
well, as the stark thing about this document is
Mm,
that you could kind of wish away and hope away a one-off speeches as maybe not being fully reflective of government policy.
right.
It's, the
At the
vice
moment.
president's views. It's indicative of something. But now that the national security strategy has put out, that means every officer, every diplomat, every member of government must understand that this is what the president and the White House wants,
Mm,
and you ought to be pulling in that direction.
yeah. I mean,
So,
look,
so
it is a set of guidelines. It is not, baked into law. I mean, we can at least say that, and we can look forward to the point when it's done and gone. if we're going forward some years. But I think you're quite right. I mean, we're going to be dealing with a period now where this is going to be a version, well, not a very specific set of marching orders, but a version of it, at least in terms of mentality. I mean, marching orders in terms of it telling diplomats to prioritize commercial interests, over anything else, essentially.
over
And
democratic, over any sort of democratic values or
yeah,
human
any
rights.
responsibility to that. I want to turn to Ukraine, but I want to just share sort of one other sort of note from that document, because which focuses on essentially on Trump's wealthy royal friends in the Middle East, and it because what it does is it sort of drops any sense of responsibility to advocate for democracy or stand up for human rights or support our democratic allies. And none of that is surprising. But the specific way he does it is sort of particularly appalling. So I mean, here's the language. He calls for, quote, dropping America's misguided experiment with hectoring these nations, especially the Gulf monarchies, into abandoning their traditions and historic forms of government.
I guess one thing that they're inadvertently uh, recognizing is how rare democracy is in the history of humanity.
Mm,
Um, but there's a kind of there's a flip side implication to it. The democracy takes work.
mm.
That the democracy needs constant renewal. It needs us to keep our government officials accountable. And that is, I think, the real calling of our time.
Which
That
is why what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Russia, what is going on in Europe is so damn important, and we would count on an American president to grasp that, that responsibility,
quick
especially on the
question.
verge of 250 years of this democratic experiment.
Quick question for you, Stephen, because I think we see the hand of JD Vance
Mm,
in this national security strategy, and you come to a terrible, horrific thought, which is the only thing keeping us from even worse foreign policy the fact that Donald Trump is the president and JD Vance is not yet the president?
That's really interesting. There's an awful lot of us, I'll say, who are hopeful that whenever exactly it is that Donald Trump exits the stage, we have an opportunity for something more productive, something less, dictatorial, something less, aggressively anti-democratic. But I
Mhm.
think you're right to worry that Vance is something, in his ambition and his hunger for power and his, desire to control that, and all of his alliances, with the Peter Thiels of the world and so forth. We are in danger in terms of his takeover. I think the key in that, as I see it, is that, whatever whatever success Donald Trump largely comes through the feeling of the charisma that others feel from him, and Vance lacks it. And so I think to the extent that Trump has been able to hold together a collection of once disparate but now
Mm.
largely single-mindedly obedient Republicans, I think that's going to shatter
The
once he's
flip side
gone.
of that argument, right, is that Donald Trump creates a lot of self-inflicted wounds for himself through
True.
chaos, through ego, through his the way he's easily manipulated and the way in which he just can't help himself. And you can very he's chaotic, but he's chaotic in a somewhat predictable way. What I imagine a President JD Vance would involve is a much more coldly efficient
Mm,
way of implementing the darkest parts of Trump's agenda without the sideshow
yeah.
of the tweets and the the weird press conferences and things like that. That they would just go after the same things, uh, but without a lot of these distractions, and that worries me a lot. That
Yeah,
worries me.
that makes a lot of sense to me. Of course, I hate to say, let's look forward to next year, but we are, 11 months away from the midterms. We're looking at the probability of the Democrats taking over the House, maybe even the Senate, but at least that. So, should Trump not finish his term, and should the scenario you're describing emerge, we at least can take some possible solace in the fact that there is going to be a more sizable and powerful opposition that will have some ability to push back against this. So there's that. Meanwhile, we're in the midst of Trumpian chaos. The in the latest version of that, it's the Trump team, Marco Rubio and Witkoff and so forth, pushing forward their 28-point plan for Russia, uh, in essence, for Russia success. Couched as if it was an American plan, and sensibly, understandably, thankfully, Zelensky has sort of, said no, and very specifically, has made clear that sort of ceding land to the Russians, only rewards them for their aggression, which is a non-starter. And specifically, I mean, and this is a guy who obviously is not willing to be bullied by Trump. And so these are all to the positive. In the last cup, and I think it was really yesterday, he's come back with a sort of counter offer, which is plans for rebuilding the country in those areas that have been demolished, security from guarantee of security from the U.S. and European nations to aid Ukraine if it's attacked again. Zelensky's also said any land concessions should follow a vote by the Ukrainian people. Where do you think we are in this process? Let's put it that way.
I don't think we're very far at all. I think that when it comes to a lot of this peace process, it's a series of theater designed, um, for one person largely, and that's Donald Trump. Um, the worry is not that Donald Trump will turn off military aid to Ukraine. He's already done that,
Mm,
or that he'll turn off humanitarian aid to Ukraine. He's already done that. The worry is not that he'd lock Ukraine out of NATO. He's already conceded that. It's not that he'll take the Russian position. He's already done that. The worry is that Russia will not only start repeating Kremlin talking points, but actually working directly with the Russians and saying, "Oh, forget Ukraine. Let's just let that war go on. Re-engage with Russia. Reintegrate. Drop the sanctions. Reintegrate them into the group of civilized nations, and forget this whole mess even happened." The real call in the national security strategy and in the peace process
mm,
from the Trump administration is, let's just forget about it.
yeah,
For all the things that it demands that the strategy demands of Europe, it makes no demands of Russia to change, do anything, to be accountable in any way, shape, or form. And I'm unaware of any points that have been negotiated that require Russia to do anything,
yeah,
other than to stop the war it started.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's funny.
lots of people have made the point, there's a 1 point peace plan. Russia, get the hell out of Ukraine.
Oh,
Peace achieved.
There was a tweet I saw yesterday that was quite instructive of the Ukrainian view, right? So in 1994, the Americans, the Brits, and Russia all guaranteed Ukraine's territorial integrity in what was called the Budapest Memorandum, and they all said that they would be a guarantor of the current outlines of Ukraine as it was in 1994. So what we have now in 2025 is one guarantor of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty giving up Ukraine's territory to another guarantor
Yeah.
of Ukraine's sovereignty who has invaded it, it's absolutely obscene.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm increasingly of the opinion that the Ukrainians ought to just jettison this peace process in as diplomatic a way as possible while causing as little damage as possible, and working with the Europeans to fight on and have a serious peace process in which they are where in which they're supported by real allies, as opposed to being undercut
Yeah.
at every opportunity by the Trump administration, whose allies are just licking their lips, thinking we can't wait to get back into business with Russian
Yeah.
oligarchs.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, the one reported response to the, proposals from Zelensky from yesterday, almost immediately what came back was that they were requiring a quote unquote "free economic zone," which tells you what their real priorities are, right? I mean, they're looking at this as an opportunity to do business, in Ukraine, with whoever, they wish to do it. And I don't even know whether Ukraine ends up being particularly involved in it. It's these folks sort of feasting on the spoils of war.
I certainly don't support it, but with America acting the way it does,
Mm,
other countries which have been traditionally quite aligned with the United States are going to look to the world's bad guys for help and support. I noticed with some alarm that Canada is considering selling some energy assets to China, for example.
mm, mm.
And I can imagine a horrific situation where China tries to get involved in Ukraine, develops business here, and takes advantage of the chaotic post-war period. And then, despite having supported the Russians, has develops a deep business interest in Ukraine. Um, I just got to tell you, there's not a lot of good news here as
Yeah.
we're ending 2025.
Yeah, I mean, look, the last time we spoke, you were sort of emphasizing sort of the hope and the expectation of Americans kind of continuing to provide the support that had been promised, maybe even worse, guaranteed. And so so now we're talking about the essential abandonment by Trump's America. So I'm curious if you could talk for a moment just about sort of the tenor on the ground. I mean, how people are feeling. I mean, do people feel abandoned? Do they feel demoralized? Does the prospects of the war suddenly feel a lot more daunting than it did, not many months ago?
Well, I can't. I think that the morale has really taken a real hit. Um, you don't need to be a diplomatic genius to know that when your closest allies and supposed friends take your murderers, your adversaries' positions,
Your murderous
and
adversaries, yes.
your murderous adversaries' positions, that's not good for morale.
Yeah.
And I speak to you as I said earlier when we first started chatting during one of the only 6 or 6.5 hours that we have power here in Kyiv right now. That's a drag, obviously on morale. Um, and people have been fighting now for many years. Some for 4, some for 11 since
Yeah.
2014.
Yeah.
And uh, so there is a real dip in the mood since we last talked. And of course, the corruption allegations and investigations into Zelensky's inner circle have also caused a lot of anger and disunity inside of
Mm.
Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because who are these government officials who, while people were dying, they were stealing? I mean,
Yeah.
uh, I suspect we will not hear the end of that. And
Yeah.
that
So how much does that affect the outcome of, Zelensky calling elections in the coming months? What happens? I mean, what do you expect will happen from that?
Well, I don't expect any elections to happen imminently.
Mm,
We have heard from our sources in the Ukrainian legislature that there may be a proposal in the next few weeks in early 2026, so in January, um, after which there would still need to be a vote on that, and Zelensky said election can take place if there's a security
Yeah,
environment that permits it, and that the laws changed, right? So um, you can theoretically have a presidential election. You can't have a legislative election; it's constitutionally prohibited. But you can have a presidential election if you change the law and permit it.
yeah,
And so they could do that. Um, I don't know. I don't know whether that will come to pass,
yeah,
and it will be very difficult because you have to think about the soldiers on the front lines who obviously deserve access to the ballot,
yeah.
the displaced people, the internally displaced people in Ukraine. You've got the refugees, millions of whom have fled the country for safety,
Right.
um,
Who are
and of
legitimate citizens and eligible voters.
yes, all of whom, uh, all of this takes place in an environment where we can probably not guarantee the safety of
Yeah,
everyone in the country. And you can imagine a situation where voting places are attacked.
yeah.
And so,
Well, it seems that the pressure to do this comes from, once again, Donald J. Trump. That a little bit was sort of pushing, like, oh, he's questioning whether Zelensky is the legitimate president because he's discarded elections, and the war is simply this kind of a sick, kind of cynical lie that the war is simply a tool to keep him in power.
it's a sort of projection. We've seen what
Yeah,
Donald Trump is willing to do when he wants to stay in power despite losing legitimacy. We've seen that very, very clearly on January 6th. So I don't think he has a lot to.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't. I don't really think he has any solid ground to stand on. But look, things are not exactly cheery right now.
yeah, yeah. So
And I think we can expect a lot of civil strife in Ukrainian society if we do get to a post-war period imminently, because there's going
yeah,
to be a lot of sorting out. There's going to be a lot of sorting out in the society, particularly for angry vets who want accountability,
yeah.
um,
Well,
and may look for extrajudicial means
yeah,
to enforce it if they
yeah.
don't get accountability through legal means.
Well, I have to say that the topic of accountability is sort of at the top of my mind, at the top of my agenda, looking forward in terms of the American politics and what repair looks like. And I hope it's not all extrajudicial. In fact, I hope that we might actually be able to look forward to, impeachments and removals from office and genuine prosecutions and convictions of criminal
Yeah.
activity, which has been widespread in the 11 months, almost 12 months that this, regime has been in power. And, I think, my view is that the people who are running for office now, need to be speaking directly about their commitment to accountability. It's always this question, in these periods of great strife, how do you overcome it? Do you just move on and pretend like it didn't happen, or do you actually really confront it in a way that allows a society to grapple with it and kind of come to some understanding and some sort of common notion that justice or a version of justice was served?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw what happened when the Biden administration and its Justice Department decided to slow walk
Yeah,
that accountability, or to say, well, it happened and the best way for us to move forward is to ignore it. There wasn't sufficient accountability for January 6th. It wasn't sufficient accountability for the first Trump administration's misdeeds. And
yeah,
so now uh, we're reaping the consequences of that.
yeah. I mean, my view is that he never should have been allowed to run for office again after January 6th, and the failure to ensure that didn't happen is a tragedy. Excuse me, that the country will be paying for, and sadly the world will be paying for a long time. So let's not end in that spot exactly. I am, one. Do you see an end in sight of some sort? And can we find sort of that place where where you are at least sort of seeing amongst your personal colleagues or others sort of a sense of agency about being able to do something productive.
I don't I don't see an end in sight,
Yeah.
but that shouldn't necessarily be some devastating truth. I look around and I'm excited to get out of bed every day, even when it's cold, there's no power, um, because I'm surrounded by people here in Kyiv who are doing the best they can to contribute to society every day, inventing something, writing something, sharing something, failing, and uh, creating things. And I'm super motivated by that, and it's a reminder to me, as they say in Ukrainian, that it's a sin to complain, I see why they say it, um, because you
It's
can
a
be
sin to
grateful for.
complain.
Um, it is. I'm grateful, for example, to have lights on right now. Usually, I wouldn't have them, and I won't in the next hour. But I'll never take that for granted again in my life.
Yes. Well,
Uh,
hopefully you have warm coats, you have good gloves. My wife says make sure you have a good hat and warm boots if you have those things, and it does help to withstand the cold and the difficulties of winter. Can I just finish by saying, and I'm just really happy we had a chance to talk too. I want to thank you for doing what you're doing. It's not easy. You do it with great spirit, and you continue to build something in Ukraine that's really important. And, I find it inspiring, and it should be a model for others that even under very difficult circumstances, we're capable of doing good things in this world. And I
yeah.
think that's the task of all of us, to take what's in front of us and not engage in the sin of complaint, but instead find a way to engage it and be productive.
Thank you, Stephen. And I want anyone who is watching this is subscribed to me and hasn't yet subscribed to Stephen in America. You can go up in the top left-hand corner of your app here. If you just click that, you can subscribe to America, and you can subscribe to the Counteroffensive if you haven't subscribed to the Counteroffensive yet.
There you go.
Um, it's very easy to do, just right here in the corner, and you can read the counteroffensive or America.
Thank you very much for exactly that. Thank you very much for the conversation. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Tim, another time we need to talk about the importance of independent media in general and especially
I
at
think we're
times
showing
like
it. I don't
these.
think we need to say it. I think we do. We do.
Good.
We don't need to speak it out. I
There you
think
go.
anyone who's watching here understands the power of and the independence and the creativity that you and I can bring to the table because we don't have, constraints. We don't have bosses who tell us,
Do this
what
and don't
direction
do
we
that.
want.
And
We
and
can be
don't
as
don't
creative
say
as we
what
want.
we all can see with our own eyes and ears, you know.
Yes.
Thank you, Tim. Look
Thank
forward
you,
to when
Stephen.
we can do it again. Be well, be safe.
Great to see you. Talk to you soon.
Bye.